On May 26, 1973, a group of 9 divers arrived at Mount Gambier in South Australia with the intention of cave diving at the shaft, a 3-feet-wide sinkhole opening leading to a large underwater cavern, famous among divers for its clear water and interesting internal structure. John Bockerman, Peter Burr, Christine Millot, Glenn Millot, Stephen Millot, Larry Reynolds, Gordon Roberts, and Robert Smith were the 8 divers intending to venture into the cave. A 9th group member, Joan Harper, had decided she wouldn't be diving and would instead remain beside the sinkhole, preparing hot soup and assisting the group in other ways. The day prior to the accident, the group signed the guest book at the farmhouse of B.V. Ashby and completed a successful dive at the sinkhole, extending a shot line approximately 150 feet into the water and reaching the primary point of interest known as the rock pile. A central pile of limestone rubble about 40 meters directly below the sinkhole entrance. They briefly explored the perimeter of the rock pile before surfacing. With their shot line already in place, the group planned to return the next morning and continue exploring the cavern. The group arrived at the sinkhole on the morning of May 28 after refilling their 72 cubic feet cylinders at Mount Gambier. They quickly descended to the rock pile. Reports from the divers indicate that they had not planned to explore beyond the edge, a narrow and downward-sloping continuation of the cave on one side of the main chamber, far from the natural light shaft provided by the sinkhole opening. The rock pile was generally considered the boundary for safe recreational diving. The surrounding cavern was dark, unexplored, covered in loose silt and limestone rubble, and continued downward to depths where the effects of nitrogen narcosis become extreme if the breathing gas is not diluted by helium. Even at the depths of the rock pile perimeter, the effects of narcosis would have been significant, which may have already been impacting the judgment of the divers. While the initial descent went smoothly, the 8 divers neglected several recognized safety procedures early in the dive. The shot line did not extend all the way to the cavern floor and was not equipped with extra air tanks, nor were the divers prepared with adequate air management strategies. The group had not established specific diving partners, and they did not use any form of safety guideline. Glenn Millot later stated they did not use safety lines because 8 separate lines in such a confined space would have created a dangerous situation for the divers. Robert Smith, who had dived at the sinkhole on 8 previous occasions and established most of the dive plan, was not expecting the other members of the group to venture as far into the cave as they did. Separate accounts from the 4 surviving divers were pieced together with the help of former Chief Superintendent Wallace Budd to establish a timeline of what happened to the 4 victims. At the perimeter of the rock pile, Smith began to feel the effects of nitrogen narcosis. His depth gauge read approximately 180 feet. An experienced diver, familiar with the symptoms of narcosis, Smith signaled to his group that he was returning to the top of the rock pile. The group signaled that they were going to continue exploring. Smith stayed by the rock pile, circling it for around 8 minutes while searching for animal bones. He then saw the torch of Glenn Millot returning from the direction the others had gone. Glenn Millot had been monitoring his air and knew that he was out of time. He had attempted to tap Christine Millot on the arm and remind her that her time was also up, but the two were separated before he could. Smith and Glenn Millot met and surfaced together to find that Larry Reynolds had already returned from his dive. Half a minute later, Peter Burr surfaced with almost no air left in his tank. Knowing the others would have similarly low air supplies, Glenn Millot quickly put on a spare tank and returned to the water. He descended to a depth of 225 feet, where the cliff began to drop off. At the edge, he found Stephen Millot's torch and camera. Significant amounts of silt had been disturbed, and the visibility had reduced to nearly zero. Glenn Millot had no choice but to decompress and return to the surface. By the time he surfaced, an ambulance had arrived at the sinkhole. Peter Burr returned to the cavern for one more look, but found nobody. By that point, the group was aware that they were looking for bodies, and not survivors. At the end of the planned dive, upon turning around to return to the surface, the surviving divers saw Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts attempt to ascend quickly back to the rock pile. However, instead of ascending along the slope, they went down. They swam straight up, possibly because they were worried their air would be exhausted soon. The two divers swam directly upward into a dome in the ceiling, which had no exit. Reynolds reported seeing their torches frantically searching for an exit before Roberts signaled back that they were lost. According to Reynolds, Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts looked frightened. This was the last time the two were seen. Likely suffering from nitrogen narcosis and surrounded in silt allowing minimal visibility, the two failed to find an exit. They exhausted their air supply and drowned. Their bodies were later found together below the ceiling dome. They had failed to escape. Reports suggest that Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts may have been holding each other, as they knew their death was imminent. Their bodies were found together. Further down and around the same time, one surviving diver says they witnessed a member of their group swimming strongly downward further into the cave. This was John Bockerman, who was likely under the effects of severe nitrogen narcosis and may have been unaware that he was swimming to his death. His body was located about 20 feet further from where he was last seen and was at the greatest depth of the four victims. The fourth casualty, Stephen Millot, may have been seen lost beneath the cave ceiling shortly before the surviving divers surfaced. Although his torch and camera were found deep at the base of the rock pile, his body was found under an overhang at a depth of only 50 feet. Compared with the other victims, little is known about Stephen's final moments, but he was wearing a buoyancy vest, and to have been found under an overhang, it is likely that he was buoyant at the time of death. A search of the cave by the police underwater recovery squad to a depth of 200 feet was initiated on May 29, 1973, the day after the accident. The search was brief, and no bodies were found. The team was aware that they were underprepared for a dive in such conditions, and the operation was described by Chief Inspector Wallace Budd as a learn-as-you-go exercise. A second attempt was made on May 30th, again unsuccessful. The police search was ultimately postponed as the team sought naval expertise on the dive, the training for which was expected to take several months. The following January, the landowners permitted a television film crew, making a documentary on cave diving in the lower southeast, to enter the sinkhole. On January 22, 1974, after several days of diving in other caves in the area, the crew descended to a depth of 50 feet and, using professional lighting equipment, illuminated the cave like daylight. A technician looking in the direction of two of his teammates noticed what appeared to be a third person behind them. Further inspection revealed that it was a body in a wetsuit. The team turned the light away immediately and surfaced together to report their findings. According to the crew, the body was not filmed. On the morning of January 23, 1974, police arrived at the sinkhole and dove to a depth of 50 feet, where they found a body floating under a ledge against the sloped cavern roof. The body was immediately towed out, and police divers continued searching to a depth of 180 feet, finding nothing else. The body was initially only identifiable by the equipment it was wearing, and official identification required dental records. The body was found to be that of Stephen Millot. The landowners, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the remaining three bodies stuck on their property, approached an amateur diving team from Melbourne to begin recovery efforts. However, the police diving team was finalizing their recovery preparations around the same time. On March 9, 1974, R.G. Traynor and a team of divers entered the shaft equipped with substantially improved diving gear. At a depth of 185 feet, Traynor saw a body below him laying on its back. On further examination, he found a second body directly beneath it. These were the bodies of Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts. 20 feet deeper, Traynor also located the body of John Bockerman beneath a rock ledge. He attempted to move the body into a more easily recoverable position, but abandoned the effort knowing he did not have sufficient air. The next day, the divers attempted to return and recover the bodies, but did not succeed, and the effort was called off after the water became too murky. Several more dives were attempted, but the bodies could not be relocated. Finally, on the third day of diving, the bodies were found, and Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts were recovered from a depth of 195 feet on March 11, 1974. Attempts were made to recover Bockerman's body from a depth of 215 feet the following morning, but the divers aborted the recovery because of the onset of nitrogen narcosis. The divers were sent home for a month to recover from the extended efforts and to further train for the final body recovery, which was the most challenging because of its extreme depth and position. The final dive plan included 1 day of diving to secure location of the body using a guideline, a rest day for the divers to recover from potential narcotic effects, though narcotic effects are now known to dissipate immediately on ascending, with no after effects, and a 3rd day to recover the body. The divers experienced significant narcosis during both days of diving, but their improved equipment and procedures ensured the operation went as planned, and John H. Bockerman's body was recovered from the cave on April 9, 1974, 11 months and 11 days after the accident. The cause of death in all 4 divers was found to be lack of air with terminal drowning. In the autopsy of Stephen Millott, the 3 possible modes of fatal injury considered were air embolism, a consequence of lung overpressure injury usually due to ascent while holding the breath, but the evidence of lung barotrauma would no longer have been detectable after such a long period, death as a consequence of breathing gas contamination, which was ruled out through tests of air remaining in the cylinder and lack of evidence of carbon monoxide in tissue samples, or death by drowning, which was supported by evidence of diatom residue in the lung tissue, indicating that there had been water entry before or possibly after death. Embolism was also found to be unlikely from the accounts of the survivors. The coroner, Special Magistrate R. F. Stokes, concluded that the 4 divers overstayed their bottom time, ran out of air, and died of hypoxia, the usual consequence of fatal drowning. A further finding was that although all the divers claimed to be experienced, and 4 of them were instructors, none of them were experienced sinkhole divers, and that no appropriate safety precautions had been taken, referring specifically to the lack of a fail-safe return-to-surface system, staged emergency decompression cylinders, any recognized safety system, such as a buddy system, and that no one clearly had responsibility for planning the dive and safety of the group. If you found this video intriguing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating content.